Warning, this show has outdated attitudes, language, and views which may cause offense today. If you don't like it, suck it.
This video is not intended for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, one and all, and welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief. I'm your host, Stone Loki, and with me today is the Mad Doctor himself.
Wonderful evening. Good evening.
How are you doing, brother?
Not bad, and a lot better knowing that our favorite superhero, Iron Man from Mexico, is doing better.
He is. Everybody, quick update on Mexican Iron Man. He is surrounding himself by hello nurses, and he is doing just fine. He is kicking back in his hospital bed. He is doing just fine, guys. He is doing great. He is in much better spirits. He's got some physical rehab coming. He's got another surgery coming, but he's doing a lot better than he was the last couple of days. So hail to Mexican Iron Man. We love you, brother, and you need to get well soon.
Yes, sir.
And hello, Lady Miss, the Guardian of the Void is here. Chris Persia, the Wrench of Wrenches, Captain Spire, the Jester of Sin, Mr. Miles, good evening. Good evening, Pod Racing Palpatine, winner of the Boonta Eve Classic. Oh, Nicole the Blind Mage. Good evening, Captain Spire. Good evening, Dee Dee Myers. Hello, sir. How are you doing, brother? Naughty Monkey Orath. Good evening. I'm still scrolling back. Gun Bunny. Hello, Gun Bunny. Mark the Infinitely Tired is on his drive home. Safe drive home, Mark. Good evening, everybody. Eris of Chaos, the Battle Angel, is here tonight. Good evening, Eris. And Eris was talking in Discord just the other day saying this is her favorite show. This is her favorite show out of the Mischief lineup. This is her absolutely favorite show.
That is very cool. That is very cool.
Scary stories.
Yeah, hello to everyone in chat, too. You guys know by now I don't interact well with chat when I'm on screen. So hello and Sunflower Toss. Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. You're good. You are absolutely good. You're golden, brother. You're golden. I was just going to ask, what are we going to talk about tonight?
Mine's a little different. I am kind of pulling away from the scary so much as I am going kind of bizarre, I guess. I was discussing with Loki before we started. There's been a thing, and most of you, if not all of you, would have seen this to some degree or another. And when it comes to psychology, and when it comes to even into the religious realms, this, like I said, this one isn't going to be so scary as much as it is monkeying with your mind. You have twins, fraternal, maternal, different, or different types, but then there's the identical. And there's something about them that no one's ever been able to quite pin down. There are certain quantum studies of how we are all interconnected by a type of energy that helps us know where other people are, what they're doing, those type of things, and some people are very sensitive to it. I discussed it a little bit on another channel once upon a time. But for some reason in twins, identical twins, it's almost innate. They finish each other's sentences. They know when the other's in pain. Some that have been separated at birth and raised in different families will have identical interests, wear identical clothes. And when they meet up years later, finding out, wow, I have a twin, and they date people who are very, very similar to what the other one is dating. They gain similar occupations, if not identical. Well, for those of you in England, might be familiar with the story that I'm going to bring up. And this is kind of recent, and this is real. It's kind of a longer story. I'm going to read it because the information in it helps paint the picture of really what's going on. This is the story of identical twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons. They're quite unusual, and I'll just let the story unfold for you. Bear with me, long read. My body isn't cooperating with me so well today, so we'll see how well we can do. Here we go. June and Jennifer Gibbons were bullied and ostracized from a young age and eventually spent years isolated with each other, spiraling deeper into their elaborate fantasy world. Let's get a little bit more. June and Jennifer were the daughters of Caribbean immigrants, Gloria and Aubrey Gibbons. The Gibbons were from Barbados, but moved to the United Kingdom in the early 1960s. Gloria was a housewife and Aubrey worked as a technician for the Royal Air Force. June and Jennifer were born on April 11th, 1963, at a military hospital in Aden, Yemen, where their father, Aubrey, had been deployed. Now, some of these words, English, you're going to understand it a little bit better, why they're pronounced this way or done this way, and if I screw up, I'm sorry, but it'll come up here and there. Later, Gibbons' family were relocated first to England, and then in 1974, they moved to Haverford, Wales. From the beginning, the twin sisters were inseparable and soon found that being the only black children in their community made them easy to be bullied and ostracized. These behaviors were inflamed by the fact that the two girls spoke very fast and had little grasp of English, making it difficult for anyone to understand them. It was a twin language, and you guys have heard of that. The bullying got so bad that it proved to be traumatic for the twins, eventually causing their school administrators to dismiss them early each day so that they might avoid the bullying. They gradually became more isolated from society, witnessing a bitter reality out of their home. Throughout the time, their language became more doctor here, and I should be able to read this, idiosyncratic, and it eventually twisted into idioglossial, a private language adopted and understood only by the twins themselves and their younger sister, Rose. The cryptic language was later recognized as a mix of Barbadian language and English, but at the time, the sped-up language was essentially unintelligible. At one point, the girls wouldn't speak to anyone, even their parents, but themselves and their sister. Even stranger, that although they refused to read or write, the two girls continued to attend their school regularly. Perhaps it's because, deep down, they both were surrounded with eternal loneliness. In 1976, John Reese, a school medical officer administrating tuberculosis vaccines at the school, noted that the twins' impassive behavior and notified a child psychologist named Evan Davis. Within no time, the pair caught the attention of the medical community, especially psychologists and psychiatrists. Reese, working with Davies and Tim Thomas, an educational psychologist who had been recruited by the Gibbons case, decided that the girls should be transferred to the Eastgate Center for Special Education in Pembroke, where an instructor named Kathy Arthur was put in charge of them. Aubrey and Gloria did not interfere in the decisions that were made for their daughters. They felt that it had to be trusted to the British authorities, who presumably knew better than they did. Their experimental treatments tried unsuccessfully to get the twins to communicate with others. In the last, none of the therapists could figure out what was wrong with them, if anything at all. When the twins were 14, they were sent to separate boarding schools as part of a treatment in a hope their self-isolation would break and that they would back into normal life. Unfortunately, things did not go well or go as planned. The pair became catatonic and entirely withdrew when separated. They didn't perk up until they were reunited. After reuniting, the two girls spent several years locked away in their shared bedroom, which was their own fantasy world, engaging in elaborate play with dolls. They created many plays and stories where each doll had its own biography and rich life, and their interactions with other dolls in a soap opera type style, reading some of them aloud on tape as the gifts for their sister. They read them aloud as gifts for their sister, sorry. I would have a heck of a hard time if I ever went to England, just understanding English. Sorry. But all of these stories had one bizarre thing in common. The exact dates and methods of the death for each doll were noted in the same way. To say that they created plays and stories set in the bizarrely strange world. For instance, these are lists of the dolls. June Gibbons, age 9, died of a leg injury. George Gibbons, age 4, died of ischemia. Bluey Gibbons, age 2.5, died of an appendix. Peter Gibbons, age 5, adopted, presumed dead. Julie Gibbons, age 2.5, died of a stamped stomach, whatever that was in their childish mind. Polly Morgan Gibbons, age 4, died of a slit face. And Susie Pope Gibbons died the same time of a cracked skull. In 1979, for Christmas, Gloria gave her daughters each a red leather-bound diary with a lock, and they began to keep a detailed account of their lives as part of a new program of self-improvement. Their diaries prominently inspired them both to write. Then they began their writing careers. They wrote several novels and short stories during this period. Their stories were primarily set in the United States, particularly in Malibu, California, likely due to the twins' apparent obsession with America's West Coast. Their protagonists were often young people who engaged in bizarre and often illegal activities. In June's Pepsi Cola addiction story, she wrote, Preston Wild King, 14, lives in Malibu with his widow, mother, and sister. He is literally addicted to Pepsi, to the point that all his thoughts and fantasies are focused on it. When he's not drinking it, he's dreaming about it, even creating art and poetry based on it. He is deeply in love with Peggy, but she dumped him after an argument over his Pepsi habit. His friend Ryan is bisexual and desires him. His math tutor seduced him, And when he was sent to a juvenile detention center after robbing a convenience store, he was molested by a guard. Kind of dark for a 14-year-old, but that was her writing. Though the story was poorly written, the two sisters pooled together their unemployment benefits in order to get the novel published by a vanity press. Jennifer's The Pugilist chronicles the story of a physician who, in the last-ditch effort to save his son, kills the family dog in order to obtain its heart for transplant. The dog's spirit lives on in the child and ultimately uses the body of the child to take its ravage against the father. Jennifer also wrote Discomania, the story of a young woman who discovers that the atmosphere of a local disco incites patrons to insane violence. While June followed up with The Taxi Driver's Son, a radio play called Postmen and Postwomen, and several other short stories. The Gibbons is considered to be an outside writer. The novels were published by a self-publishing house called New Horizons. The Gibbons twins also made numerous attempts to sell their shorter works to magazines, but were largely unsuccessful. According to most reports, including journalist Marjorie Wallace, the only outsider who talked with the twins, read each of their stories, books, novels, diaries, and experienced them very closely for decades. The girls had a very complex love and hate type of relationship with each other. Emotionally and psychologically, they were so bound one to another. This is where things start to get weird, if it wasn't weird before. They were so bound to each other that they could neither live together nor apart. They were inseparable, but they would also have excessively violent fights that involved throttling, scratching, and otherwise harming one another. In one incident, June, in fact, attempted to kill Jennifer by drowning her. Jennifer later wrote this chilling quote in her diary. "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. We feel the irritating, deadly rays come out from our bodies, stinging each other's skin. I say to myself, can I get rid of my own shadow? Impossible or not? Without my shadow would I die. Without my shadow would I gain life, be free or left to die. Without my shadow, which I identify with as a face of misery, deception, murder." Despite everything, however, the girls remained inexorably intertwined, never separate. And they did another one of these English things, and they did had periods when they got along as well. Unfortunately, Jennifer's words remain to be a painfully accurate foreshadowing of what became of the Silent Twins, which was one of their nicknames, because they really didn't talk to anybody. When the girls were in their late teenage, they began to mature. They engaged in the typical adverse behavior found in nearly all other teenagers, experimenting with alcohol, marijuana, having flings with boys, committing crimes, though these were mostly common crimes such as shoplifting and burglary. Day by day, their behavior and the whole situation became more serious. One day, the girls planned to start committing arson, setting fire to a tractor store. A few months later, they did the same thing to a technical college, which turned into a devastating fire incident within minutes. It was this crime that dragged them to Broadmoor Hospital when they were age 19. Broadmoor Hospital is a high-security mental health hospital in Crowthorne, Berkshire, England, with a reputation of handling the criminally insane. Not long after their arrival, June would go into a state of catatonia and attempt to commit suicide, while Jennifer lashed out violently at a nurse. Their hospital staff and doctors revealed another enigma of their secret life. The stuff found, it says stuff, but it should be staff. The staff found there were scratches when they would take turns eating. One would starve, while the other would eat her fill, and then they would reverse their roles. They displayed an uncanny ability to know when the other was feeling or doing at any particular time. Perhaps the creepiest stories are those from when the girls were separated into housed in cells in different parts of Broadmoor. Doctors or nurses entered the room only to find them in catatonic and frozen in place, sometimes in bizarre or elaborate poses. Bizarrely, the other twin would be in the identical pose, despite the fact that the girls had no way to communicate in each other or coordinate such an event. The girls' 11-year stay in Broadmoor was both unusual and unethical at some point. June later blamed this excruciatingly lengthy stay on their speech issues. And my reading issues, sorry. Here we go, quote, "Juvenile delinquents get 2 years in prison. We got 11 years of hell because we didn't speak. We lost hope, really. I wrote a letter to the Queen asking her to get us out, but we were trapped." The girls had been placed on high doses of antipsychotics, antitropics, and found themselves unable to concentrate. Some state that Jennifer developed a tardive dyskinesia, a neurological disorder that causes involuntary repetitive movements. This is a poem written by June in 1983 while she was at the asylum, in the full grip of hopelessness and despair, and under the influence of the psychotropic drugs prescribed to ensure her compliance. "I'm immune from sanity or insanity. I am empty, present box, all unwrapped for someone else to dispose. I am a thrown away eggshell with no life inside me, for I am not touchable, but a slave to nothingness. I feel nothing, I have nothing, for I am transparent to life. I am a silver streamer on a balloon which will fly away without any oxygen inside. I feel nothing, for I am nothing, but I can see the world from up here." Eventually, they either adjusted the medication or the doses were changed enough that they could continue to keep that extensive diaries and that they had been working on since 1980. They joined the hospital choir, but neither produced any more creative fiction. Journalist Marjorie Wallace wrote a biography book named The Silent Twins on June and Jennifer Gibson's life. According to Wallace, they shared identity of June and Jennifer became a silent war between good and evil, beauty and ugliness, and ultimately life and death. Wallace used to go to the hospital and visit them regularly at the time. In one interview, the twins said, "We just want to be able to look at each other in the face without a mirror." For them, to look in the mirror was often to see their own image dissolve and distort into that of their identical twin. This is why I started to read it. This part here, it's, the rest just kind of common stories, but this part of the twin stuff is where it really gets interesting. For moments, sometimes hours, they would feel possessed by the other so profoundly that they felt their personalities switched and their souls merging. We all know about the story of Layden and Leah Banjani, which I never did, the Iranian conjoined twins. They were joined at the head and died immediately after their complicated surgical separation. They believed the presence of the other would prevent them from having separate careers, boyfriends, husbands, children, all things which as young women they longed for. But with June and Jennifer, it was not enough to be physically separated. Wherever they were in the world, one would still haunt and possess the other. For the months before their transfer from Broadmoor, they had been fighting about which twin would sacrifice her life for the future of the other. Marjorie Wallace said in one of her articles, quote, "We were having our usual Sunday afternoon tea in the visitors' room at Broadmoor, special hospital where they had spent 11 years following a teenage spree of vandalism and arson. Their case had been complicated by their extraordinary behavior and refusal to talk to adults, their rigid and synchronized movements, and their intense love-hate relationship. Suddenly, Jennifer broke their chatter and whispered to me and my 10-year-old daughter, "Marjorie, I'm going to die. We decided." After 11 years in Broadmoor, the twins had finally been found a more suitable place for rehabilitation in a new clinic in Wales. They were due to transfer and were looking forward to partial freedom. They also knew that neither would ever experience that freedom if the other remained together. End quote. It was March 9th, 1993, one day before the twins were going to be finally released from Broadmoor. Jennifer had slumped on June's shoulder, but her eyes were wide open. Jennifer could not be awakened that evening. She died at 6:15 from sudden acute myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. In the investigation, the autopsy report mentioned a host of possible causes, from viral infection to drugs, poisoning, or sudden exercise, but there was no evidence of any of these things. In addition, Jennifer was only 29 years old and had no long-term heart conditions or such illness. To this day, the mystery of her death remains unsolved. The sudden retraction of June to Jennifer's unexplained death was the cause of grief-stricken, which forced her to write poems of deep mourning after long years, and she felt keenly the loss of the person with whom she had shared her whole life. Yet once the decision had been taken, the unthinkable had happened. She felt, as she had described to Wallace, where she visited her for 4 days after Jennifer's death, quote, "a sweet release. We were war-weary. It had been a long battle. Someone had to break the vicious cycle," end quote. June asked Wallace then if she could float a banner across the skies of her hometown a month after Jennifer's funeral. "What would it say?" Wallace asked. "June is alive and well and has at last come into her own," June replied. 10 years later, Wallace and June were at Jennifer's graveside, and June, much more realistic now, had still not wavered from the inadvertibly, why did they put that word in there? Inevitability, it's written wrong, inevitability of her loss. She talks more naturally now, lives a quiet life near her parents and her sisters. It goes on for a little bit more, but I wanted to read another poem. "We once were two. We two made one. We no more two. Through life, be one. Rest in peace." That was the grave marker on Jennifer. And the whole reason why I brought this up is, unlike any other twins that we know of, on the spiritual aspect of things, and this is where it will monkey with people's belief in religions, some religions might have a hard time with it. In my estimation, and in others, doesn't mean I'm right, it seemed in every instance that it was one spirit for two bodies, and it fought itself, looking at itself, instead of having a home in one tangible physical place. It had to share with others, and when it got separated, it was too great of a distance for it to deal with itself, and that's why it went catatonic in the same state. It was really unusual. But June only became into herself, was able to communicate with others freely, was able to live a normal life, once the other half of her had passed away, voluntarily, by their own decision. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you, let you have a little bit of the bizarre of reality.
That is something else. That is something else, the connection of twins. And the fact they had to share that. And that is bizarre.
Well, think about it. I mean, if I'm right, and you went to a mirror and you look at yourself, but it wasn't a mirror, it was another person, thinking your thoughts, making the same hand gestures that you have, understanding your gibberish. No separation. There's sci-fi and horror stories about things like that, where an evil spirit will come by and mimic you and take the place of you, and they had to live like that. It just it was bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
I completely agree. It's weird. Okay, just so everybody knows, we didn't discuss what we were going to talk about before the show, right?
No, not at all. Never
No.
do.
No.
Well, I'll send you pictures, but that's about it.
Yeah. Adego sent me pictures. My story tonight happens across the pond as well. Really weird.
Great minds.
Yeah, great.
Or twisted minds.
Twisted.
Mischievous minds.
Mischievous. I love it. I love it. So my story tonight is called The Moors. There's a link to it if you would like to read it. There's a link to it in the description. And this was written by Cullum's Home for the Damned. The soggy hearthland hugged itself underneath a domed sky. Tracks of mire lay sunken in some places. Valleys of soft earth unable to withstand the oppressive atmosphere above it, while other acres were crumbled against the high rock beneath them. Dry and tender grass creased by an icy, warm wind, which seemed, rather than broaden the vast plain, to make it like a ventless room. The fetid smell of peat wafted through the dead reeds. The land whispered fearful things. 1,000 hushed voices hissed perilously. And there hung always the suspicion that someone, no more than an outline lost in the mire of earthy drifts, stood and watched you. On a low ridge of one of these nameless slopes, risen like a crude and alien mausoleum, was a miniature cottage. The house was preserved by walls of ancient rotwood. The original tenants had been aged and humble, with gnarled hands and thick woolen cloth draped over their figures. Whatever possessed them to look over that landscape and find home is now decades gone. Perhaps they were wanderers whose brittle legs and loose flesh were no longer enough to carry them out of that squalid and barren land. They collapsed down onto the earth, trapped by the same force that shaped and depressed the ground itself. In the house that remained since those wretched souls expired, behind a pane of glass that ran thicker at the bottom from age, stood a woman. She was tall and swaying, a figure which leaned towards the window, clutching at her elbows as though willing to press through it and out into the decaying countryside. She was dressed in a thin woolen cardigan, a long starched dress with faded floral print. The wispy rain tattered against the window, spotting her face with silhouettes. She stared without seeing, or her lips pressed together absent-mindedly, or maybe from a mind that could not bear to be present. Her hooded eyelids fluttered, and she hardly breathed. "Come away from the window, Moira." She didn't move, only held herself away from him as the rain drummed quietly. "You know where we are, don't you?" she said. "Doesn't matter where we are, because we are officially on the radar." Ian enunciated carefully. He was bent over a map at the table, measuring a distance between two fingers. The gas lantern above him hung motionlessly from the weak ceiling panes. "That sounds awfully dramatic." She couldn't keep a note of contempt out of her voice. He looked up suddenly, his handsome eyes now lightless. "It's the fucking truth. Who cares how dramatic it sounds? This is going to land on our doorstep if we're not careful." Moira shut her eyes. The room was deathly still. Ian looked back down. "You have thought about what might happen to us if we're caught, haven't you?" "Who's going to find out?" Moira said. "The railway station is full of cameras. They've already put us there. It's just a matter of whether or not they have a clear picture of our faces." Her hand ran unconsciously to her mouth. I am trying to fix this. You're doing nothing now. That's what you're doing. His hands were spread wide over the table. Standing at the window like an ugly mannequin, his face became suspicious, not. And what is it you're trying to fix exactly? It can't be you're worried about covering our tracks, can it? No. You would never be so careless if you give a shit about us, what I think. And he lowered his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. Is that what you're looking for? A way out of this? Moira looked out the window across the sodden field, and she saw them. 3 of them. Through the soil and filth of Saddleworth Moor, 3 small bodies, encased in earth and varying stages of petrification. 2 boys and a girl. She felt wasted then. The worst part, she thought, was that this was the best she could wish for them. She couldn't help wondering if they had ever been well. It was a silly thing to wonder, but it's difficult when all you've seen of someone is a thrill of panic, mortal agony, and finally withering soul, to imagine that they've ever been happy. Their lives, it seemed to her, were only miserable. Forced marches to an acute and consuming end. Moira had found a wrinkled copy of a children's book in Keith's backpack. After Ian had strangled him on the side of the road, it was titled The Swish of the Curtain. It was about a group of children, each with unique talent, who band together to form a theater group. She remembered her mother reading the same book to her. The night they killed him, she went home to her parents' house. She knocked on the door, her fingers involuntarily wiping at her clammy palms. They didn't have time to react as she moved swiftly through the doorway to the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. No phone call, no what? Her mother bursts out. Who do you think you are to kick in the door like... But she didn't hear them. She held her coat close to her as she climbed to the top of the stairs and swept down the hall past her sister Maureen's old room, which also stood empty after Maureen had left for college. She flicked on the light in her bedroom and felt a pang when she saw the walls. Once covered with tacked-up posters and shreds of paper on which she had written lines of poetry, they were stripped bare. The room was nothing. An ugly, desiccated ground. Her father was bounding up the stairs after her, blustering deafeningly. You turn your back on us again. This isn't your house, Moira. Heedy, get the phone. I want to call the police. She turned to her closet and flung the door open. In it were several worn cardboard boxes, some nearly bursting with Moira's childhood clothes, toys, dolls. She yanked down one, which seemed to be full of books, toppled from the shelf over her, crashing to the floor and spilling its contents. She threw herself down and pulled books from the box, flapping them over to scan the covers, looking. Bitch, girl! Her father was standing behind her, bearing down. Moira continued to look, had to find it. As she upturned the box, the rest of the storybook spilled out. She saw one which looked like powerful hands closed under her arms, yanked her up before she could find her footing. Want you out! He breathed into her ear. Mama! She screamed, dangling. Mama, help me! I have to find it! But her mother was downstairs, contemplating actually dialing the police. Tall as Moira was, as her slight build was useless against her father's stout, thick body, he dragged her down the steps, yanking each time she grabbed the railing, pulling her across the foyer to the door and out into the yard. There he let her go. She collapsed to the lawn, sobbing. You get this straight, you, he huffed at her again on the ground. I don't want to see you on our property ever again. We told you, if you leave with him, you won't be welcome back. He grasped his chest. You destroyed her when you left, and for what? Some treacherous piece of rubbish? Moira continued to moan, face down, breathing in the grassy smell of the lawn. I don't know where we went wrong with you, Moira, he said, eyeing her, but we don't want you here. We don't want you here any longer. She stared through the window, unaware of Ian's growing tension. Tears began to burn under her eyelids. They spilled out and over the dark bags under her eyes, through the minute channels of her ashen face. Though her back was to him, Ian understood. He tensed his jaw. Don't play guilty conscience now, Moira. You knew what you were doing. I never forced your hand. You could have stopped before we brought the Reed girl out here, but you didn't. You forfeited your life. He concealed a smile. A hot pulse burst in his wrists, filling him with a kind of neutral energy, one which might yield an intense elation or a fierce madness. As far as anyone is concerned, he continued, you're as guilty as I am. Nobody's going to care that you didn't kill them. You were here, you saw it, and you said nothing. There are no trade backs this time, Moira. You're here now, and you've got to. To what? She screamed, wheeling around. What have I got to do? Stay here with you, Ian, while the country's in an uproar, while the police are searching for us and no one else? While we keep taking people's children? While she realized she was leaning towards him, pointing at him with her teeth bared. But it was too late. Ian rounded the table, seamlessly pulling a knife from his belt loop. The shrill terror of his form pounding towards her made her heart quiver convulsively. Before she could flinch away, he had a fistful of her hair. She gasped. Bending her head backwards, he laid the blade across her face, his cold black eyes boring into hers from their deep sockets. I promise you, he said, trembling, if you ever speak to me that way again, I will cut your tongue out. The knife point twitched. That I have not killed you already is a blessing, he swallowed, that you would do best never to overlook. She cried through her closed lips. The world in front of her began to blur, her vision closed in on her in a haze of gray. All she could see was Ian's semi-silhouette in front of the lantern. If, his eyes flicked, I so much as dream that you are considering going to the police, or to anyone, he was whispering now, I will make no attempts to cover up what we've done. What I will do is I will find you, and I will kill you the same way we killed them. She could see his front teeth glittering as his upper lip rose savagely. So to illustrate the point, he brought the edge of his knife over her Adam's apple and pulled. Light though it was, she felt a burning sensation which told her he had decided to make good on his threat now. His hand cupped over her mouth as she screamed. Her muffled scream reverberated throughout the cabin. It continued, however, for a second longer than it ought to have. Moira and Ian froze, their eyes brought up to meet one another's. From the shabby bathroom attachment came a shrill, fitful noise. It halted and resumed unevenly, coupled with a low, erratic thumping as though against hollow porcelain. Ian realized her suddenly and strode to the bathroom door. He opened it and peered inside. He stared, fixed for a moment, then shut the door and looked back at Moira, pressed up against the glass. His eyes were those of a sedated man. He grinned at Moira, whose throat was so tight it pinched when she swallowed. Her heart spasmed madly in her chest. She isn't finished yet, he said gently. Moira's skin stretched taut over her spine. She fell back against the wall, her arms pinned by her sides and her fingers clenching. Hot nausea fled through her bowels, threatening to bring up caustic acids. She shut her eyes, willing it down, allowing it instead to brand ulcers into the sides of her stomach. They stood against opposite walls, gazing at each other. Ian's smile grew, then faltered as his eyes clouded. He appeared as though he were having some sudden revelation. Moira waited, holding her breath. She stared at him, wishing madly for something to happen, but not being able to think of what that something was. She had the sick feeling of being told to put her hand in the curtain box and guess what lay coiled within. Looking at her again, Ian slowly turned the knife over in his hand, gripping the blade so it faced handle outward towards her. He said nothing. Moira's thoughts seemed to fragment. Something in her brain seemed to ignite like a huge and complex engine had fired to life. It revolved, whirring faster and faster as though a cog had come loose from the greater clockwork and spun freely. Ian looked patiently back. Her heart pumped so hard into the vessels it became painful. Her head and body throbbed in different tempos, becoming discordant, producing in her a soul feeling akin to that of poison. The protective faculties of her mind tried to shield her, to find some alternative, any alternative, to what Ian was about to make her do. They burned out in the process every unconscious measure penetrated by the magnitude of what was about to happen, what she was about to make happen. The cog slipped off its gears, it fell off sight, out of reach. The engine ebbed, waned, and died. Moira's face slackened, her eyes unfocused, sending the room into a soup of borderless colors. Hate and fear and dread, ripping through her moments before, now drifted formlessly over its surface, like drops of dye in the water. They dissipated in gossamer furls that slowly spread into nothingness. She saw that she was no longer anywhere but in a room. Across from her was the figure of a man who held something small in his hand. He seemed to want her to take it. She did not quite know what this man wanted with her, but she knew what he was. He was a spinning void. He was a brilliant sun eclipsed by a mortal shape. In him, though, she saw glistening malevolence bubbling on the surface of that blinding star. It churned throughout a liquid composite of two elements that mingled but not dared to mix. She was alone with a demigod. He was perhaps as old as the ash from which man arose, and he possessed with him power so sovereign gravity itself seemed to bend towards him. Indeed, she felt herself drawn to him by a force she could not quite convince herself was her own. She looked at him, and the venom that laced itself around him began to subside. She glimpsed a benevolence so absolute she would have liked to drown herself in it. He loved her, but his love was not without condition. She yearned for him. He would accept her and love her with a passion that could consume the world, if only she were to serve him this once. The thought propelled her into motion. She crossed to him, hand outstretched, fingers trembling. Suddenly a voice arose in the deep recesses of her mind, beyond the layers that had been whitted out by his influence. At first it was light and soft, as though from far away. As she walked, it became louder, as though someone was falling out of the sky right above the house. The voice was screaming. She couldn't make out who it was. It sounded so familiar. So many. She heard it. The voice belonged to her mother, to Maureen. It was Pauline, screaming with her final breath. It was John, howling from a shallow grave. It was Keith. It was herself. All of them shrieking, begging her to come back, screaming with all their force in protest of that unnatural unity, that bestial marriage. She heard them and saw that she was walking, what she was walking to. She was entering a night blacker than her most vivid nightmares could have painted for her. But she couldn't stop. His cold black eyes beckoning her. There was nothing, no one to save her. He could not be won, could not be bested, could he? As her hand closed around the hilt of the blade, whose glittering tip lay inches from his abdomen, she looked into his eyes. They were as gentle and naked as the world in its infancy. She smiled, and her hand ceased to tremble. And that is the story of the Moors.
Oh, geez, it ended there.
Ended there. Written by Collins Home for the Damned.
That was cool.
Yeah, the ending, yeah. You don't know what she's going to do. I think she's going to take him out.
Yeah. I agree. I do like endings like that where it's left up to the reader, but I wanted to see that forward thrust.
Yeah, that forward thrust. But she smiled and she stopped shaking. So either she's going to go along with it or she's not. You don't know. She's already a bad person. She's already done horrible things. So thank you, Dee Dee Myers, Nicole, Thank you. Guys, I never thought anybody would want to hear me read something like that. I had someone encouraging me to do that years ago, and I was like, why would anyone want to listen to me? It's just me. Why would anybody want to listen to me?
Because it's awesome.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you, really. Jester of Sin, Lee Anthony Davis, Lady Mist, Nicole the Blind Mage, Dee Myers, Chris Persia, Purple Valkyrie, Heirs of Chaos, Gun Bunny. Guys, thank you so very much. Colin P. Smith, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. It is really fun. It's Darth Haster, Jester of Sin. Thank you guys so very much for being here and hanging out with us.
Yes, very much so.
It is a pleasure and a privilege to get to do this for you guys.
Absolutely.
Purple Valkyrie says, well done, both of you. Thank you, Purple Valkyrie.
I don't know how that woman does it with so little sleep.
I don't either. I don't either. I have no idea.
Witchcraft.
Terry Wilkins says, such a chilling story. It is. I really liked it. I really liked it. I don't just like grab one and run with it. I'll shop. I shop all week. I'll go through story after story. This is one that I found a couple weeks ago, but I was like, I'm going to do this other one, and I want to come back to that one on another time. And so I shop. That's what I do. I kind of shop around for stories. And hello, Jedi Bill 797. Welcome to 7 Kinds of Mischief. You have 2 7s in your name, so shit. Lucky number 7. But guys, we will be back next week. I want a big thank you to Adega for doing this with me.
Thank you.
Each and every week you're here, and seriously, brother, I appreciate it. I do.
It's nothing but good. I get to have company with great people, and I get to share the stage with you, which is an honor in itself.
It's an honor sharing the stage with you, sir. So, guys, we will be back next week. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for hanging out with us. I am still working on the dreaded outro because backups have been lost, and I'm recutting everything. So I'm going to end this with some Kratos. We will be back next week. Everybody have a wonderful night, and we will see you tomorrow for The Mandalorian.
Catch you later.
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification bell.